you remember what first issue was that you read?
You're not gonna believe me, but it was. I think it was the Doctor Tongue cover of from Day of the Dead.
Hmm.
That's when I sort of like was independent enough to get to the store, which wasn't the close by store; it was the further store, and I had to go like a couple miles to find it. So I was finally able to go get it myself, and I think that was one of the first ones. Although I might have gotten the postcard book first. I don't know if you remember that one, but it was like it was just a couple of articles and then these tear out postcards. It was like a one shot that they did, and Savini's on the cover with not on the cover, but Savini's in there with Bob Martin, who was the Fango editor at the time, who he did up as a zombie.
I'm curious what were some of the earliest films that got you into the genre?
I think I guess there's a couple layers to that answer, but like I remember seeing The Exorcist at the drive-in when I could not have been more than 3 years old. Did that get me into horror? Probably not. I don't think, but it made a mark. It left an impact, and then I think I just always had a sort of a fascination with the things I wasn't supposed to be watching. I guess, right? So American Werewolf was a big one. I was 11, and I couldn't get through it. The Thing was another big one. But Romero was like one of the first videos that I rented. Video stores weren't the video stores that people who watch Stranger Things remember. It was a store that sold camera equipment and tripods, and then here's a shelf with videotapes you could rent. And Dawn of the Dead and Martin were on that shelf, and so it was a big those were like the first two things I ever rented with the VCR that we got that year. And then once you started to rent other movies, you started to recognize that some of these are good and some of these are not good. And I think, renting horror and especially renting Romero films helped me to sort of recognize that at a younger age, the concept of craft, the concept of quality in a horror movie, where it's not just blood and guts, where there's something going on here. There's choices being made here that aren't being made in these other movies. And so for that reason, Romero was just always a huge touchstone to me in terms of like the kind of horror that I was drawn to.
What's your favorite George Romero movie?
Oh God, I don't know that I could pick one. I think if you put a gun to my head, I would have to say Dawn of the Dead, just because it made the biggest impact on me. But I don't know if it's month to month my favorite or if it's his best. I think Martin is an amazing film, and I think Night of the Living Dead is a revolutionary film. Night Riders on cable just sort of knocked me out. Not even a horror movie, but Night Riders made such a mark on me when they ran it on cable in the early '80s a lot. But it's probably that depending on the weather and my mood. Like I think that it's that golden age of Romero when he's just fully in control of his powers and he's still editing his own films. I think those are the ones that hit for me.
Mm-hmm. What do you feel is his most underseen movie?
Underseen. I mean, there's at some point a mathematical answer to that, right? Like, I don't think that's even a subjective thing, and I would guess it's probably There's Always Vanilla, or depending on your metrics for it, maybe Bruiser, even, because it just didn't. It barely came out. Like 9/11 happened, and I think people don't even remember movies that happened that year. And it kind of got lost in the shadow of Fight Club a little bit, which it shares some DNA with. But as far as underseen, I think maybe it was the amusement park until this year.
Yeah.
I had a question about you encountering Martin so early on in the process. How did that one hit you when you first saw it?
Backwards, I think. So what happened was I had Tom Savini's book first, right? So I knew all of the effects that were going to happen in Martin Up and Down and how they did them and all this stuff. And I replicated the razor blade trick in front of my mom, and that was a bad day at my house. But I think I wasn't able to watch it and appreciate it as a piece of art, as a film, until probably a few years later. At the time when you were renting, and the same with Dawn of the Dead the first time, I was just waiting for the gags that I knew were coming, that Savini had laid out so carefully in his books, But Martin hit me later, and I've written about Martin, and Martin strikes me as singular in terms of it being maybe I think there's 3 films in the '70s that take big critical swings at religion, and one of them is The Exorcist, and one of them is Martin, and the other one is Saturday Night Fever. And I've argued that Martin and Saturday Night Fever are an amazing double feature if you watch them together, but because they're both about young men in oppressive religious families who are trying to escape that oppression by going out at night and doing what they feel they love, doing the thing they love best. And, one of them is disco dancing and one of them is murdering women and drinking their blood. But trust me, one day I'm going to program that double feature and people are going to understand what I'm talking about.
How did you first get interested in writing?
I think it was my 8th grade newspaper. My teacher corralled the 4 of us who could spell, I think, and said, we're going to make an 8th grade newspaper. And I immediately volunteered to review, I think, Stephen King novels. I wasn't even in movies at the time. I was interested in writing reviews of the Stephen King novels. And, the area that I grew up in was the Siskel and Ebert era, and suddenly you got it in your head that you could talk about movies and make a living talking about movies. And as I got a little older, I tried making some movies and found that I preferred talking about movies. And so those were where my writing skills, leanings started, I think, for that. And of course, reading about them in Fangoria, I've said this a million times, so please stop me if it's boring, but the different eras of Fangoria kind of hit different for different generations. And, I think Tony's 90s Fangoria was much more sort of like a very enthusiastic partner with studios. You had Addams Family on the cover, you had Jurassic Park on the cover. They were much more celebratory. And Chris Alexander's Fango was sort of responding to the internet and responding by kind of getting specific and niche and coming from a place of passion, which I think, was what Fangoria needed to be at that moment. But the Fangoria I grew up with was Bob Martin's Fangoria, which was almost like a National Lampoon with gore pictures in it. Like he wasn't particularly reverent about the horror films. And I think that the way he approached them, like he started off a Friday the 13th Part 5 article with a whole page about how sick he was of Friday the 13th movies, right? And on the cover of it was an axe. It was like he'd just given up of like trying to pretend that he loved these movies. But he did love them. He just was fatigued, I think. And that sort of not condescending, not talking down to me as a reader, like he was just leveling with me, that really struck a chord with me. And that's, if any of the writing in Fangoria has influenced me, I would say it's Bob Martin's, because he was very much a cranky old man, which I have been longing to be for years, and now I'm finally there. So the writing of it, and so I wrote about other things besides horror as I got older. A friend of mine started a website and knew me as a television producer, but he knew that I loved talking about movies and writing about movies. So I wrote about movies on his website for free for a number of years. And then when someone bought Fangoria in 2018, the person who bought Fangoria was a film producer who was familiar with my writing because I had written about his movies. And so he invited me to pitch a take on bringing back Fangoria, because it was about 2 years off the grid at that point. And he liked my pitch, and so he hired me, and I've been just sort of rebuilding it since then, trying to, find different balances of voices, trying to find what's new and exciting in horror, and also how do we talk about the old stuff in a way that's interesting, in a way that hasn't been done a million times already. And so that's always the balance I'm looking for, because Fango isn't a nostalgia magazine. Fango's about looking forward. It was always looking forward when I was a kid. It was what was coming out that month. It wasn't Famous Monsters, right? It wasn't a nostalgia rag. So I don't think Fangoria should be a nostalgia rag. It has to look forward or look thoughtfully backward. Like I said, when I went to the Living Dead thing at the Monroeville Mall, I wrote a piece about that and about it being the first gathering that didn't have George in it, right? Because it was like right after he'd passed. And just trying to have a clear-eyed perspective that isn't just blindly fanish. You know what I mean? There's really interesting things to talk about in horror, even the old shit that we love so much. There's so much to cover, but I just don't want to repeat what's been talked about if we can help it.
What in horror today is not being talked about that you're trying to bring more to the forefront through Fangoria?
I don't know. If it's not being talked about, it's because I don't know what it is yet. So I don't know how to answer that question. But I do think that I was really handed a gift in Fango coming back in 2018, because horror is getting really interesting again, and interesting in a way that isn't just, the new French extremity or crazy extreme horror backyard shit that you're seeing happening. Although we do cover that stuff too, But horror is legitimate in a way. True horror is legitimate in a way that the mainstream hasn't let it be in a long time. There's Oscar nominations happening. There's people doing career best work in a horror movie. Like Toni Collette's amazing, but like Toni Collette is more amazing than she's ever been in Hereditary to me. And that, again, to me, it's always like a back and forth between what it is now and what it used to be. And what it used to be was really disreputable. And people would go on talk shows and complain about horror movies. And you'd have poor Tony Timpone would struggle, and Gingold still struggles with like people insisting their movie isn't a horror movie. Like that was shit that Gingold started a column in Fango that says it's not a horror film. And it was like just coverage of movies whose filmmakers were insisting it wasn't a horror movie. And I feel like that weird shame about horror is gone now, and we're able to dig in a little bit more into like real A-listers doing some career best stuff in there. As far as what's not being covered, to me, it's always about trying to make room at the table for people that haven't had a chance to talk about horror yet. So it's that becomes political when I think it shouldn't. I don't think it's a political point of view. I think it's a human point of view. We need to like make room for the next generation, and we need to make room for new people who have new things to say. Like that's, to me, that's like the core of Romero, right? He wasn't like arguing for some status quo to stay in place. He was blowing it up, and he has that story that he told about there's horror that is a ride where it takes you on a little trip and it drops you off where it picked you up. And then there's the horror that turns over the apple cart. And Romero was always drawn to turning over the apple cart. So I'm, maybe romantically or perversely attracted to that idea of like fucking it up a little bit. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can swear on this. Just kind of like shaking things up a little bit, because I think that's the spirit of horror too. But just maybe not in the ways that some folks might think, where we've got our just gorehound fans who just want old shit and they want their gory stuff back, and I think that we can kind of like shake it up on a deeper level if we put our minds to it.
I had a question about you mentioned you were invited to offer your pitch for what you thought Fangoria could become. I'm curious, how did you get invited to that, to make that pitch, and can you walk us through that process a little bit? You making the pitch and them saying yay or nay?
Somewhat. So it came out of the blue, right? I was producing like nonfiction television. I was doing true crime. I was doing home improvement shows. But as a fun thing on the side, I was writing on my friend's website, and I would write about horror a lot, but I would also write about James Bond movies and all, whatever struck me, right? So when the folks who bought Fangoria in 2018 pitched me or approached me, so it was the producer of a film called Bone Tomahawk and Brawl in Cell Block 99, and I really love those movies, and I covered them very passionately on that website. So he became aware of my writing that way, and I think that the way I wrote about the stuff, not just what I wrote about, sort of was the direction that he was thinking of trying to bring back Fango, and how do you do it. So he asked me to. I met with him in New York, and we talked through what a 2018 Fangoria would be. And that's still the question. I just change the year every year, but I'm always asking that question. Every year I ask that same question. What's the 2021 Fangoria? Because that's a question we have to answer before we can print page one, right? But in 2018, Fango had run aground because it couldn't make money as a print publication, and it wasn't delivering. And the digital thing, people weren't drawn to it. I don't know how you guys feel about Fango, but people like seeing it on a shelf. They like seeing a cover. They like that logo. So to me, what we had to do was lean in, and this was my pitch, we had to lean into the analog nature of it. It had to be an invitation to get off the internet for an hour, right? This is a magazine, and what's in the magazine is you're not gonna get a digital version, you're not gonna get it on your Kindle. You've got to go find it. You've got, like the way I had to do on my bicycle when I was a kid, you have to go find it, you got to pick it up, and you've got to sit down and page through it. And so then everything stemmed from there. All right, you're paging through it. What does the page look like? How is it different? How is it the same? How many pages? How often are we going to print? And so we kind of just talked through those things, again, in the context of a world that's largely digital now, and it's internet driven. So but at the same time, I have friends that spend crazy money on vinyl records again. So I know that there was an audience for physical media still, right? And if you're like even halfway cynical of corporations, you are already on board with my ideas. You shouldn't be living a purely digital existence, because all the music on my phone, I'm just licensing it, right? It can go away at any time, and it has sometimes, and it makes me crazy. But the magazine is my magazine, and it sits right there, and it doesn't go away. So that was the draw. That's the North Star of the whole thing, right? And then it was about, well, how often will we print? And we wanted to make it an event. The math of it is sort of like, how do I make it so that someone my age feels the excitement they felt when they were 13 waiting for their new Fango? And as you get older, time changes and time moves by more quickly. And I didn't think a monthly was the answer, but a quarterly makes it an event. It gives you something to look forward to every couple of months. So that was my pitch for that. And the other thing that I thought we had an advantage with is that if you love Fangoria and you love that logo, you have an affection for that brand, the thing that I exploit on the regular is there are working filmmakers out there who are like driving the industry, changing what they're doing, that actually one of their weird bucket list items is to have a byline in Fangoria. So, I used that to our advantage. And so in issue 3, you've got Paul Thomas Anderson interviewing Jordan Peele. You know what I mean? And you've got Edgar Wright interviewing John Carpenter. We can kind of, Danny Boyle interviewing the director of St. Maud. These guys who grew up with the magazine suddenly, just as a lark, will want to write an article for us. And so that lets us put something in that magazine that you can't get anywhere else. That was the pitch in a nutshell. Exclusivity, a sort of an aspirational kind of print thing that had exclusive content that you could only find in the pages of the magazine.
What kind of response have you gotten from folks who are from our generation who grew up with it first run versus maybe the 13-year-olds now or the kids now that are just now discovering Fangoria? Are you seeing a response from the younger generation?
Somewhat. They're the harder sell because they fall into one of two camps. Like a magazine is like a dinosaur to them, or the magazine is like a dinosaur and I love dinosaurs, right? Like there's a real novelty to some of these kids getting to have a thing that they can page through and go get signed at a convention and stuff. That kind of stuff. It's been working on that level. The writing's been pretty grown up, but I've been trying to get back to Tony's magic formula of 60-40 to images to text, right? In the early issues, I don't know if you have any, but if you, like, I'm not going to tell Paul Thomas Anderson he can't have a 10-page interview in the magazine, right? But now I'm trying to get it a little more sort of user-friendly, a little more accessible, a little breezier to try to wave in those younger kids, because I think they're excited by the idea of it, but I have to give them a product that will resonate with them somewhat. And so it's always a sliding scale, and it's always a work in progress. But kids are kind of like perking up about it. I think that the more we're on shelves, and so we changed owners last year, and the new owners got on board with an idea that I've been trying to do forever, is just get us back on Barnes & Noble shelves. There's a certain ceiling on the internet to how many people we can let know that we're back. But every convention I've been to in the past 3 years, I find somebody who didn't know we were back. And it's because we don't have that saturation of just being on a store shelf. And so finally, as of January of this year, that started to change. So the kids are coming. We're working on it.
What was that process, or what was the hurdle that you needed to get over to get on store shelves? Was it just to change your philosophy?
That's exactly what it was. Yeah, it was. The previous owner felt that the key to success was subscribers, and that may well be true. But the subscribers, or the potential subscribers, I should say, have to know that we exist first, and being on a shelf is free advertising. Right, it's whether they buy it or not. Whether if they pick it up and page through it, and put it back, suddenly that person knows we exist again, and maybe will be moved to subscribe at a later date. But we needed it just purely as an awareness tool, I think.
How difficult was it to set the price point? Was that because it's a little higher than it was in the past, and was that a tough decision?
It is higher, but those decisions are above me. I don't get to make those calls. When I heard the general idea of the price point, I did push for 19.79 because that's when Fango went into print. But that said, I think that's when it becomes very attractive to subscribe, because you're not paying the cover price. You're going to get something off there. We have deals all the time. There's 40% off bundles or half off bundles of back issues on our site. But I will say that page for page, we are at least on par with the other horror magazines. If you're talking about price per page, because another horror magazine might be 64 pages and 25% ads, which is standard. That's no knock on anyone. But our move right now, our model is that we are 100 pages, and there's usually not more than 4 pages of ads in that magazine. So you're getting, like, per page, we're up there with any of the rest of them, and maybe better than some of them.
Being 100 pages with 4 pages of ads, do you worry about having enough content, even with it being quarterly?
I worry about people delivering the timely content on time, but I have certain tricks to make sure that we're never short on pages, certain evergreen articles and cool features that we can plug in at a moment's notice if somebody drops a deadline or misses a deadline. And no, you'd be surprised how quickly 100 pages will fill up. Even with my new rule of no more 10-page Paul Thomas Anderson interviews, like a new release will get maybe 7 pages, more likely 5, and anything that's not will get 3. But it fills up real quick.
Coming into 2018, stepping into Fangoria into the position of editor, did you? I mean, you didn't have any prior experience of running a magazine. Can you talk about stepping into that role and into the day-to-day functions of that role?
Yeah, well, what I tell folks is what sucks is that 2 things have happened since I took over Fango. I've done less writing than I've ever done in my life, because you're too busy wrangling all the other writers. And I've watched less movies than I ever have in my life, because I don't have time to watch them sometimes. Like, if a new movie's coming out and I need somebody to write about it, the hours that it would take to ingest that movie, do those interviews, write that stuff, I have to delegate it most of the time. The trick is just finding a team that I trusted to delegate that stuff to. And I would say I've been very lucky in that regard. There's a lot of really talented folks out there who live and breathe movies, who have dreamed of writing for Fangoria for their whole lives. So I have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to folks who want to do this work. And I've become more of a manager, but also just more of a curator in terms of, like, I say this, and I said this about a documentary that I produced called Horror Noir, which is about a history of black horror. It's not me telling these stories, but it is me setting this. It's like throwing a dinner party, right? Here's issue 14. This person and this person and this person will make for an interesting mix, and I'm also at the mercy of what's coming out in that quarter, right? But it's not. It's hunch based more than anything in terms of coverage, and it's a sliding scale. I'm constantly adjusting my approach to try to make the magazine better and better. I'm not calcified in my approach, which is maybe the advantage of not having an experience running a magazine. But as far as the logistics of, like, getting it to the printer, getting people paid, all of that stuff, I have someone named Jessica Safa-Vermeer who is like the engine of the whole magazine. She just works her ass off and makes sure that stuff is moving and deadlines are getting hit. She's our operations manager, and she's crucial to what we do.
What's your favorite part of putting together an issue?
Man, selfishly, I would say, like, so we've got a certain budget for writing, we've got a certain budget for artwork. Sometimes it's fun to, like, think of a specific image and then basically point at an artist and say, go make that, and then they do it. That's when I feel the most godlike. I'm like, I want to see this picture of Godzilla, and this is happening in it, and then then a painting shows up in the mail. It's amazing. That's the most fun part. But weirdly, I think I got into this just sort of like tradition of, like, I'll drop the masthead on social media to let people know who's in the issue and stuff. Not even what's in the issue, but who the contributors are, and watching them all get excited about that their issue is coming out. That's a very fun and satisfying part for me. I feel like Santa Claus when that happens. That's pretty cool. Sometimes working with studios is great. When studios understand, and again, it's that thing of, like, some of the folks at the studios now, who I imagine that role used to be a real obstacle to Fangoria editors, we've been around so long, we're an institution, like you said, and studios understand what it means to that filmmaker to be in Fango, and so they facilitate and they get it. When people get it, that's my blanket answer. When people get it, it's great. Um, there's still people who don't get it, but we're working on that.
At one point, you had said there was a kind of change in horror where it's not so looked down upon. Can you, in your opinion, pinpoint where that shift happened, whether it was a singular event or a series of events that kind of shifted the perception?
I would say it's the horror fans coming into their own, growing up, the people who grew up and loved horror and then have decided to make a career out of it. In a sort of a next level mindful way. And I'm not just talking about like Ari Aster or Jordan Peele, who like Peele got a good deal of success in comedy, but he's died in the little horror nerd and he just wants to make horror movies, right? That's a part of it, but also the folks doing the work behind the scenes, I'd say. So to me, Sam Zimmerman at Shudder is like a guy who's changing the game very quietly and nobody even realizes it. But we're in the streaming age now, and there's so many streaming services, and they're all kind of contract based or algorithm based or whatnot. But Shudder's one of the few channels that like there's a person picking the movies that are going on the service, and so Sam is deciding what the horror canon is now, I think. And we couldn't have a better person doing it. Like, he really knows his shit, and he really like digs deep and finds really amazing, original, insane stuff. Not just new, but even like rep titles that maybe you don't know about. Movies are getting rediscovered because of Sam. It's like he's doing really important work.
Do you see Fangoria kind of spreading into that realm more, into streaming or just multimedia, just other avenues of publication?
That's a question for my bosses. I couldn't speak to that, but they are starting a production wing, and there's been other Fango production wings, films under the Fangoria banner, but theirs is going to be a little different, and it's going to be a little more kind of marching to the beat of its own drum, I would say. And I'm probably contractually forbidden from saying anything more than that. I think.
Does the name Fangoria, even though it was out of the game for a couple of years, does it still carry that weight with the Barnes and Noble? Oh yeah, Fangoria, come on in. I mean, is that your experience?
I was getting emails about it from Barnes and Noble employees who were super excited to see it back on the shelves. This is something I didn't know until we were in the stores, but I don't know if it's everyone, but I think every Barnes and Noble store has its own Instagram account. And so, like, if you go to the Barnes and Noble at such and such shopping center, they've got their own Instagram, and so many of them were like sharing the magazine being back on the shelf. They were real excited by it. So, for whatever reason, yeah, I think it does have a pull. And since Barnes and Noble happened, since we came back in, we've been experimenting with this idea of two different covers. So there's a cover that goes on the newsstand, and there's a cover that goes to subscribers. And depending on my inbox on the day, we're always getting it wrong. And you should have given this to the subscribers and this to Barnes and Noble. And one day we'll get it right. But can't make everybody happy. But this fall, I don't know when this is going live, but the issue that Barnes and Noble is getting, it features two horror glam drag queens kissing a severed head and holding a meat cleaver. So I'm real curious to see where their threshold is for what's acceptable to put on their shelves. I know it used to be a problem back in the day. Fango had to be in a black bag in certain shops, but we showed it to Barnes and Noble and they seemed fine with it. So we're gonna see what happens. We're gonna see if we get any angry parents writing in about a week or so.
Since Fangoria came back, what issues gotten you the most responses, whether it's good or bad, but the most feedback that you've gotten?
Well, people got real mad about issue 4 because it was midsummer, and we leaned into the color palette of that movie. So it was a lot of pastel greens and yellows and pinks, but it just went with the image that was happening, and people got lit up that there was no red on the cover. Said, "Where is the red?" And we actually turned "Where is the red" into a discount hashtag. Like, if you sign up with this code, you can get something off. That was very noisy. I think that was maybe the noisiest cover we did. Issue 2 was a lot of fun and was well received because we put Joe Bob on the cover. And as a nod to Bob Martin, who I said was like sort of my Fango editor inspiration, and he was on the cover as a zombie with Tom Savini back in the day. I'm on the Joe Bob cover as a zombie because Joe Bob's in a movie theater surrounded by zombies, and I threw myself in there as one of the zombies. That was cool. It's hard to know what ones made the most noise, but I remember 4 being really pissed a bunch of people off because it wasn't what they were expecting. And I'll take that as a win. If I can give you something you're not expecting, then I'm doing something right, I think.
You spoke earlier about the collectability of the magazine in regards to how your approach to the content.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other angles you take towards that, like maybe the material of the magazine, or is maybe just the name enough?
Oh, you mean to make it sort of a collectible kind of thing?
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're screwing around with all kinds of stuff. We issue 12, the subscriber cover is glow in the dark, which as a 70s kid was something I was always excited to do. Issue 13 with Michael Myers, the blood that's spattering across is like glossy, so it gives it sort of a 3D effect. And we're just playing around with different stuff like that. My boss keeps saying we have to do a scratch and sniff cover, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that that's what the people want, but we'll see. If there's a title that warrants it, maybe Firestarter, right? We can do like a wood burning or something. Not sure, but I don't know what a Scream cover would smell like. Nor do I think I want to.
Have you given any consideration to some of the? You're probably not far enough along yet, but maybe some of the the greatest hits like the old magazine did, or there was the poster collections, or just
like
any variants. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so again, as of issue 11, spring of this year, there's been 2 covers for every issue, a subscriber and a newsstand. We did do a poster in the new one. So if you're a subscriber, you're getting a Halloween Kills poster in the magazine. So that's stuff we're playing with, yeah. As far as a greatest hits or the bloody best of Fangoria, I think it was called back in the day, I want to earn that, I would say. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know if it's there yet. It's possible. And there's so many cool articles that I went so hard on the first 2 issues trying to find great stuff that is now out of print. And we have to stick to our promise to not repeat it digitally. So I would love to do a greatest hits just to get some of the articles I'm proud of back into print. For example, in issue 1, a writer came to me. He had discovered these treatments for a Texas Chainsaw sequel that were written in 1975 that no one had ever seen. And there's like a mystery behind who wrote them, and we solved the mystery in the article. And like, I'm super, super proud of that. And Gary Pullen did an amazing double spread of the Chainsaw House for the issue that I just frankly want more people to see. So yeah, a bloody best would be cool, but we have to earn it, and we have to figure out the strategy for it.
Have you ever thought of doing an issue as a one-off, whether it's once a year or once every couple of years, of all the stuff that you couldn't get in that year's run of subscriptions? Kind of like, not an outtakes, but kind of like here's the rest.
That would be tough because the stuff that I don't have time for, if it's evergreen, I can always put it in a later issue, right? So like last issue, something got crowded out of the magazine, so it's going into the winter issue. But if the stuff is timely or dated, then it wouldn't make sense to run it. Like, I don't want to run an article about the lighthouse next year. You know what I mean? So thankfully, we're like slowly getting the website back up to speed, and that's sort of a repository for where if our quarterly schedule misses something, the website can always be on hand to publish something on the day, right? Where I don't have to worry about something getting stale, which is a giant problem with the quarterly, because if I'm printing that magazine to hit on April 1st, if something came out March 20th, do I put it in that magazine? It's already a week old, but it's got to sit on the shelf for 3 months. So that's always been just a trial and error thing, trying to figure out what timely coverage goes in a quarterly that doesn't feel stale too quickly. And studios do not like to run stuff super early, so it's always a challenge to hit exactly when we need to with that stuff.
And so as we've done these interviews, something that we've heard a little bit is like set visits have been more infrequent these days. It's been more of the junket style. Is that
Yeah.
are you experiencing that as well?
Yes. And, frankly, that's fine with me. I don't ever want to make a writer unsafe. I don't ever want to like have it on my conscience that somebody caught COVID because I sent them somewhere. Um, I don't need that in my life. The drag of it is that there's an energy to a set visit. It's exciting. It's a job perk for a lot of these writers who don't get paid a ton. To be fair, I mean, I think we pay a fair rate, but the energy and effort that they put into getting me that article, uh, any article, any writer that's putting time into something probably deserves more than they're getting. Right? We exploit. We not we Fangoria, but we as an industry exploit the passion that writers have to go the extra mile. And I think sometimes when you can give them something, whether that's a set visit to their favorite filmmaker's next movie or something like that's a perk, right? They dig that, and so it sucks that we can't do that right now. But we're getting there. The world is slowly opening up, and there's been smaller films that are doing set visits. But yeah, I'm missing a bunch of stuff this year. There's a lot of cool films that are being shot that I'm gonna have to play catch up on. You know what I mean? We're not gonna have it ready to go, and the publicity machines are such that they're not ready to sort of get it to me until we're all scrambling. You know, so that's a challenge.
Do you have, whether it's a personal or professional, like in 5 years we want Fango to be at this level, or do you reevaluate or evaluate that on a quarterly or annually basis and readjust any goals that you have?
Editorially, I do it every issue. Editorially, I want every issue to be better than the last one, and if there's a quantifiable way to do that on under the umbrella of the things that I can control, I'll do it. It's not always the case. I would like our shipping to be better. I would like our schedules to work out the way they're supposed to in terms of getting the magazine into people's hands. But the post office has been a nightmare for the last couple of years, which I found out the hard way, and that's out of our control. But in terms of like getting better artists and getting great writers and getting like a surprising voice that you might not expect to be writing about horror, that stuff I can control somewhat, and I'm always trying to get, trying to top the last one. But numbers and subscription stuff, that's for the publisher to figure out. I mean, I'm sure they want more, and yeah, I want more too. But that's part of their strategy that I can only weigh in on. Those aren't my calls.
Back to when you started in 2018, you mentioned you had an assistant. Was she already on board, or did you have to assemble the entire staff from scratch?
So Jessica, I wouldn't call her my assistant. She's my colleague, and she knows more about getting this magazine done than I do. But she was already in place. The new owner had hired her already, and she had sort of like dove in and had to learn how all of this stuff works. Beyond that, editorially is where it's my domain. So I hired Meredith Borders to be my managing editor, and she's recently departed me to go do her own stuff, and so that's been a challenge. And there's the art director has changed over this year into a new person, and they're doing a great job. So that's my staff, to be honest with you. Everyone else is a freelancer. And the good news about freelancers is that if somebody's not working out, I can just swap it all out. But I have, over the last 3 years, built a very reliable pool of contributors that I feel good about.
What have you seen, or what do you feel has been the biggest stumbling block for the horror genre in a 2021 era?
Stumbling block. I think there's a lot of folks jumping into horror now as fans, and as the internet has democratized the fandom somewhat, and everybody's got a voice, and everybody's making their own noise in their own corners of the internet. And so there's more people being heard talking about horror, which should be great. But I also think that there's people that are showing up to horror without really wanting to engage in the material in good faith, and are frequently alarmed by what they see in horror. So again, to compare it to my youth, it used to be parents groups complaining about horror and saying this is too far, this is too much. And now we're starting to hear it from like these newer horror fans. And that's probably not a great road to be going down. I think horror fans have to stay open, and they have to sort of be more progressive than they think they are in terms of letting horror get messy, letting horror be problematic, letting horror be complicated. I think fandom in general, whether you're talking about Star Wars or Marvel or horror, has gotten a sort of a moralist streak in the last 10 years that I'm not quite on board with. And I think that could be trouble for horror if we don't recognize it and take steps to remind them why people show up to horror in the first place.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked at the content of that last Rob Zombie film. That like I didn't think you could get away with that anymore, and somehow it's in Walmart.
I mean, yeah, it gets made. It's just that I whether you like it or not, I think that Rob Zombie needs the space to be able to do that stuff. And we can argue the merits of it, but there's arguing the merits of it and there's trying to silence it. And I'm never going to be on board with trying to silence it. So
do you feel that horror fans now kind of want more of the same, the stuff that we got introduced on, and are afraid of the newer stuff that we're not used to, like, the Midsommars and the Hereditaries, Lighthouses, that kind of stuff?
Well, I think it's different camps, right? There's older horror fans from my generation that hit me up every week and want to know why Freddy's not on the cover. Well, there hasn't been a Freddy movie in 11 years, and you hated that one. So, I need Fangoria to look forward. But that's one camp, and then they want to argue that Midsummer and Jordan Peele stuff, it's got too many statements and it's too political. And I'm like, hey guys, remember this dude? It's Romero and Carpenter trafficked in the political, and they trafficked in making statements and political satire. But that speaks to the fact that people come to horror for different things, and some people are engaging with it on different levels than others, and that's fine. We all had our journeys. But no, I think the folks that are fans of the newer horror are just there's a little bit of there's a scolding vibe that's happening anytime something goes too far, anytime something kind of crosses a line that's in their heads, that they think the line in their heads needs to be the line for everybody, right? We've gotten very self-centered in terms of what we think is acceptable for us has to be the line for everybody. It's hard to explain it without calling people out, and I don't want to call anybody out, but I think that horror scolding used to come from without, now it's coming from within.
Do you think some of that line crossing when you were talking about like Jordan Peele and these guys being so political, and you referenced George and John Carpenter, who were very political back in the day? Do you think it's because we're more hypersensitive to it now with social media, with everything being so politicized or in your face, that we just now see it up front rather than digging through the layers of horror like the genre has been known for?
Maybe. I mean, there's smarter people than me need to weigh on this, but I think the short answer is that we've gotten very binary, and that we've all become single issue voters to one degree or another, and we're either in this camp or we're in this camp. Whereas, I thought Carpenter at one point considered himself a conservative, and because there were things about his takes that were kind of on the conservative end of the spectrum, but other things were on the almost revolutionary, like beyond leftist end of the spectrum for Carpenter. So I think it's we've dumbed it all down to the point where you're either in this camp or in this camp. And maybe we need to for a little while until we straighten out some of our bigger problems. Maybe we need to kind of uncomplicate it for ourselves. But that's bad news for horror, which used to live in the gray, I think.
Assuming there's a new film coming out, is Fangoria still a home for Freddy, Jason, Leatherface, and company?
Do you know how badly I've been trying to put the new Texas Chainsaw in the magazine, and I can't get anybody to return my phone calls? They don't know when it's coming out. So Chainsaw is my garbage franchise that I'll go see no matter how bad you tell me it is. I will not miss that movie. I drove 2 hours to go see the last one, which you guys don't even remember probably, but 2017, Leatherface. So I'm excited to see a new Chainsaw movie, and if I had the opportunity to put one on the cover, especially now that I've given myself 2 covers where I can do a studio movie and some nasty thing, I would do it. But Netflix bought it. It's got swallowed up into the Netflix ocean, and Netflix doesn't tend to promote stuff. They tried with Fear Street, and I think that they were disappointed with what it did for them, and have gone back to just sort of not telling us anything. So, that said, well, that's an easy answer because they won't ever stop making Leatherface movies. But if they made a new Freddy movie, I would put it on the cover in a heartbeat. It would be huge, huge news. And, I'm just waiting for them to do it. I mean, Michael Myers is on the cover of the subscriber issue for the fall. And it's the second time I've put him on the cover since 2018. So I'm doing my part for these complaining old men. They got to put out a movie, and then I'll do it. I'll do my part, but, you got to make a Freddy movie first. Oh, and
Okay.
Jason? I would love another Jason movie, but those guys keep suing each other.
That's what I was going to say. Maybe with your influence, you could I don't know, just
Yeah.
get in touch with the right parties.
The power that I wield, sure.
Emergency. You are to tune to the emergency station.